Clear conscience. When Sasha, Michael's sister-in-law, was offered a consulting job at a big teaching hospital that needed help setting up its new outpatient facility, she had to commit to spending half the week in Chicago. Her home was in Madison with Jim, Michael's brother, and their 12-year-old daughter, Quinn, who loved horses and shopping and had plans to become a hostage negotiator after college, if not before, something Michael and Jim found amusing, Sasha preposterous. After she accepted the job at the hospital, there had briefly been talk of her staying at Michael's place 3 nights a week during the 6 months she would need to commute to and from Chicago. Ultimately, his offer was rebuffed. She rented her own apartment, one closer to the hospital than his place, which was in a neighborhood several miles north of the medical campus. Whether Sasha or her employer was paying the rent on her small, opulent one-bedroom in a high-rise that overlooked Lake Michigan, Michael didn't know, but he suspected that regardless of who paid the bills, it was his brother who had insisted that Sasha find her own lodgings. It was also possible that she wanted her own place, an eventuality that bothered Michael slightly more than his brother, opposing their occasional cohabitation. A year and a few months before Sasha was hired for the Chicago job, Michael went through an unpleasant divorce, his ex-wife, Tess, adding extra enmity to the proceedings by writing, under a pen name, acerbic blog posts about her view of the divorce and its causes. The pen name was a mockery of anonymity. All of their friends and family knew of the blog, which made scathing fun of Michael's perceived shortcomings and infuriating habits. The one scrap of good fortune in his marriage's demise was that there had been no children to argue over along with everything else. After Sasha settled into the routine of her 3 nights and 27 weekly hours of work for the hospital, Michael met her for dinner on Wednesday evenings. This was usually the 3rd night of the 3 she spent in his city, and often an air of subdued festivity permeated their meetings. Sasha claimed not to read Michael's ex-wife's blog, where he was referred to alternately as the tightwad and the crocodile, and sometimes, more inexplicably, the mole. In addition to serving as the focus of his wife, should I start that sentence over?
You know what, I'll edit out
Okay. Okay.
I had an issue, my camera just lost focus completely, probably a paragraph ago.
Should I just start it after Sasha settled into the routine of her 3 nights?
I think so.
Is that working now?
I think so. Yeah. Can we just start at the top of the...
A year and a few months before. Okay. All right. Is it okay if I start now? All right. A year and a few months before Sasha was hired for the Chicago job, Michael went through an unpleasant divorce, his ex-wife, Tess, adding extra enmity to the proceedings by writing, under a pen name, acerbic blog posts about her view of the divorce and its causes. The pen name was a mockery of anonymity. All of their friends and family knew of the blog, which made scathing fun of Michael's perceived shortcomings and infuriating habits. The one scrap of good fortune in his marriage's demise was that there had been no children to argue over along with everything else. After Sasha settled into the routine of her 3 nights and 27 weekly hours of work for the hospital, Michael met her for dinner on Wednesday evenings. This was usually the 3rd night of the 3 she spent in his city, and often an air of subdued festivity permeated their meetings. Sasha claimed not to read Michael's ex-wife's blog, where he was alternately referred to as the tightwad and the crocodile, and sometimes, more inexplicably, the mole. In addition to serving as the focus of his ex-wife's virulent frustration over the scale of her accomplishments so far, he was supposedly the spoiled younger brother to Jim, who was 5 years his senior. Jim was also 4 years older than Sasha, and Michael liked that he and Sasha had grown up listening to the same music and seeing the same movie matinees, whereas his brother, with his half-decade handicap, was sometimes teased for being an old man when they were all together. How could he not remember who Pauly Shore was? I'm going to read that over. How could he not remember who Pauly Shore was, or Blind Melon and Mazzy Star? That Jim could recall dialogue verbatim from Casablanca and Apocalypse Now and all 3 of the Godfather movies, that he favored the classics over the junkily ephemeral, that he was wittier and more cultured than Michael and his entire graduating high school class combined, as Jim, slightly drunk on strong eggnog, had once claimed during a fractious family Christmas party. These qualities were thrilling to Sasha when she met Jim, but now not so much. I shouldn't talk about him when he's not here to defend himself, she said, looking down at the second fish taco on her plate, deciding, Michael assumed, if she should eat it. If she didn't, he would ask her for it. Jim would have started eating it without permission, but he was her husband and also always ravenous, in part because he claimed to be too busy to eat lunch, or else decided to make do with an apple and handfuls of raw, unsalted almonds at his desk while the other attorneys in his office went down the street for sandwiches and fattening, overdressed salads. Full of sodium and bad calories, he said, with a disapproving shake of his head. Nutrition density is hardly given the time of day in this country, he also said. Lentils! We should all eat lentils at least every other day. He ran 40 miles a week, more when he was training for a marathon. Michael was fit too, though not as disciplined or, as he had said to some of his friends, as obsessive. He exercised only a couple of days each week with weights at the gym and half-hearted 5-mile bouts on the treadmill. The dreadmill, his brother liked to say with a frown. Jim ran outside, rain or snow or sweltering sun. You know I won't tell him, said Michael, feeling a little uneasy despite his desire to hear Sasha say critical things about his older brother, disclosures that always interested him. She met his gaze, her dark eyes clear and unblinking. I know, but I don't want you to feel like you have to put up with me. I can go to a shrink. She laughed softly. I do go to a shrink. This was new, somewhat startling information. Michael glanced again at her leftover taco, unable to look at her for a few seconds. That's a good idea, he said. She laughed again. I suppose so. Does Jim see one too? She shook her head. No, you can just guess what he says. Running is his therapy. I went with Tess to a marriage counselor for a few months. It was like getting kicked in the ass for an hour straight. Sasha made a face. That doesn't surprise me. On the way home, Tess kept the kicks coming. He paused. Sorry, I'm the one who shouldn't be bothering you with this stuff. She smiled. Not at all, Mike. Don't worry. If you've looked at her blog, you already know that we saw a therapist. He hadn't visited her blog in a couple of weeks. He knew that he should never, under any circumstances, read it, but some nights, angry or embittered by the memory of an old argument or petty humiliation, he did look. And then he lay awake for hours feeling furious and half awed by his ex-wife's vindictiveness. Doesn't she have other people to hate? His friend John, who had been his best man, once asked.